That's right, you've seen the thumbnail and the runtime. We'll do it. We'll watch every George Carlin's HBO special. We will review all of them, we will see what George himself thought about them, we will see how he changed with time, how he evolved, and how he reacted to changes around him. And finally, we will rank all those specials and create the ultimate list of Carlin's best and worst, which will be based entirely on my opinion, which means that it will be definitive and the only list that's correct and true. We have a lot of ground to cover, so grab a drink and come with me for a journey through every George Carlin's HBO special. My name is Krzysztof Sawczuk and this is Stand-Up Teka.
You know the 7, don't you?
Who are these people?
The world is like a ride.
Oh, it's brutal!
Okay, we will start with a little background info on George and his career. I won't be going into details. If you want the whole story, I recommend the HBO documentary George Carlin's American Dream. It's really good. What's important in context of this video is that George wasn't a debutante when he recorded his first HBO special. No sir. You can even say that he already had 2 full-fledged careers, first as a clean mainstream TV comic, and then as a part of the counterculture movement, when he transitioned to more risky personal and social commentary-esque topics. He went to colleges in search of a new, more open-minded audience. He had 4 gold comedy albums, one of them even gave him a Grammy Award, and 2 that sold a little worse throughout the 70s. It wasn't like now when a new and up-and-coming comedian can have his first breakthrough with an HBO special. He was already a well-established artist, some can even say that he was already a comedy star. But, like I said, the sales of his albums dwindled, which had an impact on his ticket sales. George described the situation to Art Bell on Coast to Coast. And that's one of the things that saved me. I've had an album career in the 70s where I had 6 albums and 4 of them went gold. Then, when my album career kind of, you can't be the hot new guy in town forever, so that's kind of faded in 76-77 and along came HBO. And I had another medium, such as albums are, when I was uninterrupted by commercials and I was uncensored by someone looking over my shoulder. On an album, you put out whatever you want, and on the HBO show, I do whatever I want. And that took my career, which was in the middle of the crossroads, and really pushed it to a high status. So, let's check out his debut on HBO, On Location, George Carlin at USC. Keep in mind that HBO wasn't at the time this media force that it will become in the 80s. It started a couple of years earlier, and their series of live performances called On Location already featured comedians like Robert Klein, Rodney Dangerfield, or Steve Martin. Carlin's episode, recorded at the University of Southern California, which is very characteristic for him in this period, starts with a disclaimer from somebody's mom that some language that will be used can be not for everyone, let's say. Then a short interview with George and we finally go to the performance. And right off the bat, 2 things are striking to me. First, this special looks great. The production value is very much here. I don't know if it was shot on film, but man, a lot of stuff that comes out today doesn't look that good. And secondly, George is really nervous. His voice cracks here and there, but even his manner of speaking, very calmly, slowly, almost whispery, is much different from the things that we will see in the future. In terms of material, there is a lot of goofy stuff here. Some physical comedy, some observational, everyday stuff, and some gross-out humor. The biggest laugh George receives after a joke about a dog licking his balls. But in general, it's very jokey special. We jump from one topic to another, often without any segue, and receive a pack of jokes on a given thing. And then to another and another. Not much long-form stuff here, and some bits just end without any punchline, like he just ran out of jokes on them. So we move on. In the middle there will be a technical problem with a microphone, and it all stays in the special. They really were still learning how to tape these things. In the second part of the show, George will go into stuff that will become his signature, language humor. Some classics here, near miss, military intelligence, business ethics, and of course, a new, more elaborate version of 7 words that is preceded by another disclaimer. You can hear in George's voice that the legal case is still in progress, but the audience fucking loves it. The end came out as a little too pretentious and, important to me, but that's a detail. The whole thing lasted over 80 minutes and it's a little too long, but I must say that this special still holds up, not only as a historical document, but as an enjoyable watch. We are off to a good start. And I bet you that Louis C.K. fell in love with this font right here. I think that I should point out that some of the material from his HBO specials could be heard before on his albums. And I don't mean it as a complaint, it's just the way comedy operated at that time. The rule of always new, never heard before stuff on specials will be established much later by Carlin himself, among others. I won't list any recurring bits and jokes from albums, but if something repeats between specials, I will probably point that out. Anyway, let's go to his another outing, George Carlin Again, sometimes referred to as George Carlin at Phoenix from '78. That's the one where the stage is a circle surrounded by the crowd. But before that, we'll have some intro about George's childhood, which really is just a filler. Anyway, we start with some observational/linguistic one-liners, and I must say that the crowd reaction is kind of underwhelming. He doesn't bump or anything, but it's not killing either. The first longer bit, about time, is very clever with many act-outs and silly voices, but it's not the funniest thing ever. There will be also the news segment with some jokes that are repeated from the last special. A nice moment of interaction with the crowd will come when somebody throws eye drops on the stage, and in response to Carlin's question if his eyes are so bloodshot, somebody else throws in a joint. We'll also have the return of Hippy Dippy Weatherman, one of his characters from the 60s, who really should have stayed there. But maybe it's a kind of nostalgic bit for the audience members. The second long segment is about death, and here you can see the future of George. Very wordy, clearly written out bit. He always referred to himself as a writer who performs his own material, and this is the first instance of that kind of approach. Finally, we will receive, probably for many, a definitive version of 7 words, once again expanded on and with some new observations. And then there is a nice moment when he introduces to a stage his wife to thank her, and then he just dances. In general, I think that Again is a tier lower than his debut special. It relies too much on act-outs, almost physical comedy, and silly voices. There's also not much of any social commentary or more controversial subjects besides 7 words. And again, over 80 minutes is just too long for a comedy special. Carlin Again was also filmed with something else in mind. George was going to release a concert movie when half of the runtime was taken by a performance and the other half by animated vignettes and sketches that were supposed to illustrate what was said in the material. But the project titled The Illustrated George Carlin never came to fruition. By the way, that's why it was filmed on the circular stage, to allow for more dynamic and interesting camera angles that would be used in the movie. The cultural landscape was also changing, and that included comedy. People had enough jokes about cats and dogs. SNL gained popularity and one of its alumni, John Belushi, starred in the biggest grossing comedy of all time at that point, Animal House. There were also Monty Python, Steve Martin and Andy Kaufman with more absurd, strange and interesting view on comedy. Finally, the whole stand-up boom of the 80s was just around the corner. Carlin's comedy started to be passé. Let me quote his pseudo-autobiography, as he called it, Last Words. In an article in Rolling Stone, Cheech Marin and Tommy Chong picked up on this. Cheech said, George Carlin is irrelevant. George Carlin is obsolete. He's talking about peace now. If all you can talk about is peace, you're obsolete. What about the issues of the day? This from Cheech and Chong, masters of cutting-edge, state-of-the-art political and social satire. Finally, in the last days of 1979, somebody wrote a column in a paper I admired. And when I say admired, it wasn't just some mainstream newspaper. On the other hand, I've completely blocked who it was. He wrote, well, the 70s are over. Say goodbye to lava lamps, say goodbye to wide lapels, say goodbye to disco, say goodbye to platform shoes with goldfish in them, say goodbye to Studio 54, say goodbye to CB radios, and say goodbye to George Carlin. And that brings us to the year 82 and Carlin at Carnegie. which is pivotal and interesting for many reasons. But first things first, we start with another intro. Thank God it's very short. I've never liked intros to comedy specials, and Carlin is not an exception to this rule. And then we have this super interesting stage design, and boom, the most famous opener of any stand-up show ever. Have you ever noticed that women who are against abortion, and so on? This is a different Carlin. He looks different, he talks differently. The second heart attack that he suffered only 2 months before left a clear imprint on him and even made his way into the material. He seems much older, less happy, less cheerful. His bitterness, which will define specials recorded in the 2000s, can be seen here. But even said all that, he kinda creates a new genre here, the complaining comedian. Of course, it's not just doom and gloom. There will be plenty of linguistic stuff, a handful of goofy act-outs, observational stuff about food mixed with a cavalcade of silly voices and faces, and jokes about, you guessed it, dogs and cats that will be repeated ad nausea by whole generations of open micers and internet memers. He's George Carlin after all. He's an icon for a reason. Also, how big do your balls have to be to take the fucking notes on stage with you at Carnegie Hall? Anyway, from Beat's perspective, besides food and cats and dogs, we also have the last iteration of 7 words, this time with a list of words that sound dirty but are not. I think that this is the strongest part of this special, and the crowd reaction seems to confirm that. In contrast, around the halfway point, Carlin will serve us some of his worst stuff ever, with awkward poses and silly faces that are supposed to cover that. So in terms of material, it's a very uneven special, to say the least. But we cannot not address technical aspects. Carlin wasn't the hottest name at the time, so they could only book a one night at Carnegie, and that means no backup show, which leads to a couple of strange editing choices. They supposedly cut and spliced it for 4 months before settling on the final version. And on top of that, that was also the first of his specials that was produced and edited by his own company and his wife, and that shows. There's a learning curve to this shit. So, even if I understand the importance of this special and mind-blowing opening, it's not the best watch today. Probably his worst to this point. Let me read you another excerpt from the last words. Jerry mentioned here is Jerry Hamza, Carlin's longtime manager and friend. The material wasn't stellar. With the exception of the heart attack sweepstakes and 7 dirty words, it was mostly a place for my stuff. As usual, I was unhappy with my performance. So was Brenda. She'd been saying all along that Jerry was crazy to insist on Carnegie, where we could only do 1 show and no safety. She actually reduced me to tears. But I thought she was right. I'd missed a giant opportunity. Jerry wasn't so sure. He'd seen a performance that wasn't bad. What he also seen that I couldn't was powerful symbolism. I was back at Carnegie Hall, where I'd been 10 years earlier at the height of my first breakthrough. I'd shown I could bounce back from the near-fatal big ticker event and joke about it. The lack of focus, the tentativeness, the hey man looseness of the 70s had all vanished. I took the stage from the moment I came on and held it till I left. Sure, there were some fluffs and short timing and nervousness, but the first hints of a new voice were emerging with an edge to it that hadn't been there before. Well, the change may be on its way, but Carlin on campus from 1984 is still very much not it. We start with another intro taken in parts from his album Class Clown, and off we go to... What the fuck is this set? It looks like some math game show? Anyway, some one-liners and non-sequiturs. The message from the Institute of Pancakes is one of my favorites. Stupid, but funny. And some prayers, and we plunge into one of his most famous bits from this era, the stuff. I never liked it to begin with, and here he's really hamming it up with physical comedy and voices. Remember those animations that were supposed to go into his concert movie? Here they are. And there will be a couple of them. And they are of high quality and all, but man, they destroy the pacing or any momentum that show was getting. Time for some more act-outs. This time we are in the car, and I think that George decided to use all the car jokes that he ever wrote. But, to be honest, some of them are great and still can be seen as memes on the internet. In general, in those everyday mundane parts of material, he always had a knack for writing stuff that is timeless and that will be rediscovered time and time again by other comedians in the future. Okay, a little bit of gross outs and we are arriving at another classic bit, baseball and football. One of the most Carlin-esque bits ever leans very heavily into his obsession with words. No real punchline for this chunk, which George admits himself. Another batch of cartoons, and we end on one of the worst closers I've ever seen. It's a chant of some sort in tandem with a dance that is supposed to be funny because there are funny words and curses in it. Dude, what a bizarre and weak way to end this less than stellar special. It's on par with Carnegie, maybe, or even worse than that. To be honest, one look at the cover with its companion album will give you a good taste of it. Yeah, something needed to change. And I'm very glad to say that change is here. Playin with Your Head from '86 marks for me the start of the golden era of Carlin specials. Starting with the name and the cover art itself. It's not just Carlin here or Carlin there, there is a creative decision, it's an artistic choice. But let's not get ahead of ourselves because this time the intro is the whole fucking short film noir. Why? What for? I don't know, but Kevin Hart would be proud. But let's jump to special itself. Visuals are back in form. Once again it's recorded very nicely. More camera angles, much better set design. And material. We start with a long, typical Carlin linguistic bit about hellos and goodbyes. But what comes next, that make me say that we have a new quality here. A joke about child pornography in freaking '86. That takes some balls. And then, domestic violence, even if it's taken to an absurd point with plants. Whoa. As a palate cleanser, some goofy physical act outs, and then boom, fuck the dead. That, ladies and gentlemen, is in my opinion the first essential and quintessential modern Carlin bit. It's controversial, regarding a very serious topic, outrageous, very logical, well written, and not the funniest, but still very clever. Great joke about never fucking a 10, and we go to another touchy subject that is taken very lightly here, bisexuals. Then an observational bit about losing things, and you just see that George is in the zone. He has found his groove. He will not let go. He will even make fun of himself, which was never a big part of his repertoire, for having an earring in the past. And another, quite progressive, bit about men's purses. That's just good stuff. The closer about sport is a little weaker in my opinion and loses some steam, but still, this special is awesome. Without a doubt his best up to this moment. Even if you skip the first part of his HBO catalog, don't sleep on this one. Oh yeah, at the end we'll also get an ending to an intro movie, but it seems that the whole plot was just there to play with our heads. George himself has seen some shift in his material here. The 1996 HBO show Playin with Your Head has a piece called Hello Goodbye, which is about the ways we say hello and goodbye to one another. The mature voice hadn't evolved fully, but it had pace and urgency and verbal fireworks. The end of it is love and regards, which in a way is an outgrowth of stuff, narrowly focusing on one word or phrase, treating the trivial as a matter of great significance. It was more an exercise in form than a piece with a particular point, but my mind was beginning to work differently. With my first transformation, it was exciting just to speak to my audience one-on-one, instead of performing impersonally in front of them. To confide in them who the internal me really was. Share insights with them, be their friend. Now I was driven by a different need, to convey things about the external world, or my version of it. Lead them logically, or apparently logically, to conclude that my version was correct. Take them step by step to the place I wanted them to be. But the change was occurring not only inside George's brain, the culture and comedy were also changing once again. He was noticing and reacting to that. When there was a new hot comic they would talk about and I haven't seen him yet, or her in some cases, they say, "Oh, you gotta see this guy's great." So you get a little nervous about that. If you are hot and you are doing well and they say, "He's good," you say, "Okay, well, you know, it's good. Oh, he's gonna be on? I'll watch that." So you watch and you have one of two reactions when you watch him. Either no threat there, or I've gotta get back to work. Sam Kinison was the I gotta get back to work guy. And Sam Kinison, because he raised his voice, literally, to such an extent, it taught me something at that time. And it helped fuel a slight change or significant change in what I was doing. I said, oh, you have to raise your voice. And I meant it figuratively. He did it literally, but figuratively, the culture was getting noisy. There was a din. There was a lot of competition for people's attention. And somehow that translated to me as I have to raise the stakes a little bit. I have to raise my voice. So that gave me a start into that period when the real growth happened. Late 80s, early 90s. And that takes us to what am I doing in New Jersey from 88, the year that I was born. We start with another intro. This time it's okay. It's short and pokes fun at Jersey itself. And we dive right into the list of people that George can do without. Good opener, but the lack of elaborating on every group makes it a somewhat missed opportunity. The stage design this time is great. A mix of back alley and some military zone correspond nicely with the material. It's a little elaborated, but it's also a sign of what will come in the future. No more just a curtain or a wall. Make it something more. Something more, I dare to say, special. Then we go to uncharacteristic for him, topical stuff about the Reagan administration, then the FCC, then religion and abortion. He's grilling Republicans and you can see that he's really pissed off. I will let the repetition of the people who are against abortion joke slide, cause it fits here perfectly. And then we have a real Carlin in full swing. Bulimia, gun control, the USA founded by slave owners, tobacco, cocaine, liquor. You can clearly see the Kinison inspiration here. Faster, louder, angrier. But then we will see some of his, let's say, vintage style. From a linguistic beat about the Civil War to even some more goofy and lighthearted stuff about stuff you can do to keep others alert. To be honest, I think it's the weakest part, and when you had a taste of new Carlin, this more act-outy, silly-faced physical George seems stale and so unimportant in a way. And this bit is really long, and it goes and it's mildly amusing at best. And then we got like a mix of those two things, the pissed off guy and everyday observations in the whole chunk about cars, bumper stickers, tickets, etc. More often than not, humor is based here more on an attitude than on punchlines. To some degree, you can even see here the influence of Andrew Dice Clay, which is a crazy idea, but that's what I see here. In conclusion, What Am I Doing in New Jersey is kinda stitched from two sets, one more serious and one more goofy. But the common denominator is anger, and it's more angry than funny in my opinion. Another transitional special for George. I would definitely rate it below Playing With Your Head, but above some of his older stuff. But the audience? Oh man, they eat this stuff up. I know that George found his crowd many times over at this point, but this is the reaction that I remember from some little clips that were circulating on the P2P sites when I was discovering Carlin for the first time many years ago. Overwhelming reactions. And it wasn't a coincidence. 1990 and 88 specials were both shot in New Jersey. Yeah, kiss her where it smells, New Jersey. We finally discovered not to do HBO shows on the West Coast. Californian audiences just sit there trying to decide whether they are going to go to the beach tomorrow or Magic Mountain. Not a lot of concentrated energy in a Los Angeles audience. What I'm Doing in New Jersey in 88 was taped in the Park Theater in Union City. Doing It Again in 90 in the State Theater in New Brunswick. The difference in response over the West Coast was explosive. Okay, George himself pushed us to our next stop, 1990 and Doing It Again. A short intro with some clip show and off we go. We start with, as per tradition, some stuff about language. But there's a different vibe to it than in his 80s specials. Carlin is still fascinated with words, but he's also pissed off by them and tired of the way people are using them. Big act-outs and cavalcades of silly faces and voices are left in the last decade. This kind of wordplay is more on point, it has some meaning to it. And suddenly, out of the left field, bit about taking pants out of your butt crack. And the whole observational / gross out chunk is just funny, which I really cannot say about yet another bit about dogs. Dude, I think you covered this topic enough in the past. Yeah, there are clever observations here, but I don't know. But the crowd loves it, so let's move on. And we are moving on to one of his signature bits, how stupid an average person is, with some topical insights that lost me completely. George talked many times about his aversion to topical humor for exactly this reason. Those jokes lose their meaning over time. And before the next bit, let me quote one interview. Well, the work just got better in about 1990. It was like the last of the 80s, the early 90s. Something just happened to the writing. And I think that what it was, I finally figured out that I don't give a fuck about anything. I really don't care about the human race. I really don't care about democracy or religion or God or these people in this country. All I care about is telling you what's on my mind. So if you don't have an emotional stake in the outcome, you are a lot freer. And I discovered that I had gotten to that place. I didn't put myself there, I got there. And I looked and I thought, this is great. I'm really free to sit out here somewhere, near Jupiter and go, look at that, look at that. And I don't care. I'm not lobbying for a result like a lot of these comedians seem to. I hear these political comedians, they are lobbying for something. I don't care. And that freed me and the work got better. And boy oh boy if he will show us that attitude right now. We got a bit in which he defends jokes and makes some of his own. And I must say, I love this bit. It was incredibly ballsy to do this stuff in 1990 and it still holds up. Especially when the audience doesn't react with a lot of enthusiasm and he just keeps going. You can see that the idea is more important to him than cheap laughs or applause breaks. And then we go to people that want to control your language and feminism and it becomes a little bit preachy, but still, if that's not poignant social commentary once again in freaking 90, then I don't know what is. And then, boom, a great bit about blowjobs and another about prostitution. And it seems like George knows that the show is getting a little heavy, so we switch to more goofy stuff for a while. Some silly products that he invented and stuff that you never see or hear. But it's just a palette cleanser, even if with some dark overtones. And then some jokes about organ donors, with one especially brutal that some would say didn't age well. But it's just a trampoline for him to jump to more words that are prohibited with a whole cavalcade of slurs with the N-word like 3 times and the whole idea that context is what matters. I cannot overstate how groundbreaking it was and to some degree still is, cause we really didn't evolve much from that time. If anything, we went backwards. And we end on another one of his hits. Euphemisms and other words that are supposed to hide the truth, with PTSD, cripples, senior citizens and whatnot. Wow, what a special. Important, poignant, fearless and funny. In that order. If not for this whole chunk about dogs, it would be one of my favorites. But still, around the top of the list for now. 90 special solidified the new voice with strong, disturbing pieces. One of them was Can Be Funny, which was less about than about being told what you could and couldn't say. The early 90s were the heyday of identity politics, and, especially on campus, language codes were cropping up everywhere, trying to define and prohibit offensive speech. I opened the show by saying I wasn't sure what I could say anymore. Comedians especially were always being told there were off-limit subjects that weren't funny. I disagreed. Like they say, nothing new under the sun. And now it's time for another milestone in George's career, Jammin in New York from 1992, for the first time aired live straight from Madison Square Garden. 1990 was a sign, looking back from the perspective of years, that Jammin was on its way. And when it came, on April 25, 1992, in what used to be called the Feld Forum at Madison Square Garden, in front of 6,500 people, it leaped past all the others. The train had arrived. Jammin in New York has always been my favorite HBO show. But it was more than just a favorite. It lifted me up to a new plateau. A good plateau. It became my personal best. the one I had to beat, the template for future HBOs in terms of craft, artistry, and risk-taking. No intro this time, only info that special is dedicated to Sam Kinison, who died in a car crash not long ago, and we go straight into material. And what has started is, this time, war is on George's mind, and he is ruthless, bombing only brown people. That must have been incredibly courageous and fresh at the time. Think for yourself, don't trust the government. All wars are because of fear of having a small dick. That's the anti-establishment, raw, well-articulated Carlin that we all love. And, since we are talking about dicks, how about the whole linguistic bit about phrases and words that combine fucking and war? And then about social classes and divides in a very social commentary-esque style. Dude, the first 10 minutes of this special are like whole classic Carlin in a nutshell. All his signature things condensed and concentrated. Great stuff. Then in '92, even though I did these HBO shows and they were plenty good, I like them, I still would stand behind every word of them, but there wasn't a new voice yet. It was just like an improved voice that was ongoing. In 1992, I discovered silence on stage. I discovered that you could have long periods of silence. I had to learn that there were times in the show when it was okay not to get laughs. Because one of the jobs that I had, besides getting laughs, is to engage the imagination. Just in general, to engage the person's imagination. If I make them laugh along the way, that's the part of the deal for me. But I learned then that I had a kind of more serious writer voice in me. And that's when another shift took place. And the shows that followed, that came in the 90s, are representative of that. There is more of a social commentator in them. They're more of, if you will, a quote-unquote philosophy beginning to emerge. And that was another important shift for me that is still playing out. And by the way, that was transmitted live and it looks better than many of today's specials. Great camera work, absolutely iconic stage design, it's just beautiful to look at. Compared to his early specials, everybody did their homework. George, his production company, HBO, no hiccups here, it's just perfect. As a palate cleanser this time, George serves us a bit about the little silly moments that we all share and the whole chunk about airports and airplanes. Of course, it's as cliché as it gets today, but keep in mind that that's also because he exhausted this topic exactly on this special. It's not a bad segment, but we lost a little bit of steam from that great opening. Let's get back to business. Anorexia and bulimia, fuck those rich cunts, and more on the war. Or should I say, wars that America always declares. War on drugs and so on. Another example of his social commentator side dealing more with issues of the day. Then golf, bad news, and finally, the planet is fine. One of his crown jewels and probably his most famous bit from this era. In general, defining white, rich, liberal people as the root of many problems is so ahead of its time. What can I say? This is George's favorite special and it's an absolute classic. The middle part is a little bit weaker, but it's sandwiched by two of his strongest and most iconic routines. It goes around the top of the list for sure. Sometime in 1993, after the Madison Square Garden show, I said to myself, this thing has been kicked up to a different level now for me. There's been greater intensity in the work. And several comedians, and that was what woke me up to it, Jerry Seinfeld, Gary Shandling, Eddie Murphy, Bobcat Goldthwait, and several others on different separate occasions, after that show in '92 said something to me to the effect of, "You really did something different this last time, Carlin. You have changed the deal a little bit. You have kicked it up to another level, either to yourself or for us too." And when I heard that, because comedians are notoriously stingy with praise among themselves, with each other that is, so that really grabbed me and I looked at it a little more carefully, and I saw, at least I think what I saw, was that I had really abandoned all hope. I have given up that liberal, political comic, social commentary comedian undertone of, "Gee folks, if only we'd act better, everything will be alright." Well, I don't believe that. For the next special we would have to wait for almost 4 years because George tried his luck in the sitcom world. But short-lived, the George Carlin show didn't turn out as well as he hoped for, The boundaries of TV production, writers' rooms, and tiring schedules made him miserable. He was happy when the show got cancelled after the second season. He could get back to his real job, to doing stand-up. Back in Town from 1996 aired once again live from the Beacon Theatre in New York, and it's, not to spoil the surprise, my favorite of his specials. Just one look at the start of the show and you can tell that Carlin is back. And he's back on absolute top. Standing ovation in this beautiful theater. And boom, this opening line about abortion, which we heard in the past, but here it's more refined. And he needs it to launch a whole chunk about abortion, pro-life and conservatives in general. Who besides George could open his comeback special like that? They are not pro-life, they are anti-women. Once again, way ahead of his time. Characterizing audiences is always an imponderable. They may not agree with everything I say, but I rarely get vocal dissent from the audience. The abortion piece in the next HBO show in 1996, Back in Town, at least during that period of testing and building, was one of the few. There were often walkouts, never heckling. People quietly got up, turned around and walked out. Jerry would stand in the lobby just to see them, and to hear them if they did say something. We'd laughed about it afterwards. You should have seen the first guy that came out. He was fucking stricken. Almost walked straight through the glass. This piece had been a while coming, like many of my long-form essay-type pieces. But there was one moment in the original version that I really liked, but eventually didn't make it to the HBO show. It says a lot about that relationship with the audience. My method of argument is not to fuck around responding to one side or the other of a current debate, but to go all the way back to the fundamental core of an issue. So in the original version, after life started about a billion years ago and it's a continuous process, I said, and that's a heartbeat in there, so it's murder. But it's just a viable homicide. I love that moment. Really risky, really disturbing, and showing why this has always been and will always be such a violent debate. You can't have a totally closed mind or dogmatic opinion about it. And I thought they'd agree, enjoy the thought, the moment. But I was wrong. Audiences wouldn't follow me there. It was one step too far. They didn't enjoy the risk. I'm a realist. After a while, I dropped the line. And maybe they were right. Maybe it was too complex an idea or the phrasing was too harsh. But it shows how the audience shapes the material. They are part of the process. I write, they edit. Quick stop for comparing people to chickens, and we're back by the grill. Sanctity of life, Catholicism, homosexuality, capital punishment. George is in amazing form. He's quick on his feet, fully confident in his abilities. The first half hour of this special is almost devoid of any pauses longer than 3 to 5 seconds. The barrage of arguments, jokes, act-outs is truly relentless. We often think about George as a writer, and rightfully so, but you cannot forget about his delivery. It's also top-notch. He really sells his material and gives it 100%. Another of his classics bits about prison reform and the televised Mad Max-esque super prison complex in Kansas. But even in this barrage of more serious topics, we will find a place for a good old fart jokes. And funny ones at that. In general, I think that I like this special so much because it's just funnier than his average. The balance between those essay-esque, more thoughtful bits and straight-up jokes is just perfect here. Which is exemplified by another chunk, the linguistic stuff, the mandatory point of George's specials, which is not always as funny as here. And the same can be said about the free-floating hostility, which is just an excuse to complain about some random stuff, from pandas on the news through water bottles to freaking boomers. Yes, George Carlin complained about boomers in fucking 1996. And let's end on another classic. If you vote, you don't have a right to complain. Man, it's just perfect. The most Carlin-esque special ever. One of the pinnacles of this art form, from material to delivery to audience reactions to technical stuff, everything is 10 out of 10 here. It will be very difficult to beat this one. Okay, the next special is 40 years of comedy, and I will skip that one because you have only 20 minutes or so of material here, and some of it would end up on other specials anyway. The rest is an interview hosted by Jon Stewart. It's a nostalgic journey for sure, but let's move on. You Are All Diseased from 1999, Beacon Theatre once again, and by tradition by now, aired live. We start with a list of complaints which, by that point, became one of the signatures for Carlin. And you can see the first symptoms of the fact that age is starting to catch up with him. He speaks slower, with less vigor. The opening bit is not bad by any means, but it's not Jammin or Back in Town level either. The bit about terrorists on the planes is, let's say, ominous, but we'll come back to it later. The bit about hygiene is the real start of this set for me. George is gaining momentum. There's more energy here, which is of course needed if you want to convey that you are pissed off. And the joke about disinfection before lethal injection, if he's the first person that come up with that, and that may be the case, mad respect. Then we go to cigar smoking, white, old, rich pricks sucking on a big brown dick, Carlin in full swing. And swift left turn to freaking angels, then Harley Davidson themed restaurants and blues music. He quickly bounces from topic to topic. He's funny and poignant. And then a mandatory stop at the language field, this time with a focus on the language used by white liberals. And I must say, that's one of my favorite linguistic chunks of his. Meticulously constructed, brilliant and timeless. It still works today, maybe even better than 25 years ago. We'll also have a little bit of social commentary about police brutality and topical humor about Clinton. Great bit about how children are overrated, and it's time for a little mood shift to something lighter, more absurd and quirky. TV and Willie Nelson's jokes. We lose some steam with chunk about names of things and places and TV commercials, with very Carlin-esque commercial lullaby. Long string of various terms and phrases used in ads. Only he did that kind of shit, and to be fully honest, I don't get it. It's not funny, it's not very impressive, but hey, he really liked that stuff. Anyway, let's move on to the main course of this special, the long bit about religion. That's right, the famous bit about God sending you to hell because he loves you and that he needs your money is here. Talk about famous bits and Carlin classics. It's up there with Planet is Fine and 7 Dirty Words. But overall, some decline in form is starting to creep up on George. The balance between funny jokes and angry rants is this time in favor of the latter. Sometimes you can hear people who don't like Carlin say that he's too preachy, too wordy, and doesn't have a lot of punchlines, and you can see here that there is some truth to it. Still, a couple of real gems here. Top part of the list, for sure, but not at the peak. But let's get back to this terrorist/airplanes bit. Carlin had more stuff in that vein and worked on a really big piece about giant natural disaster. But then, something happened. I had big hopes for the next HBO special. It will be my 12th, and 12 is a magical kind of number. And it had the makings of an explosive show with a big fat target in the White House, Governor Bush and his Christian fucks. I had a sledgehammer values piece, why we don't need 10 commandments. And I had this major new tour de force. Taping was set on the Beacon Theatre on November 17th. I named the entire show for the new piece. I had a hunch it was going to be the first HBO in a decade to equal, maybe even surpass, Jammin. I held on to that hunch right up to 8:47 AM, September 11, 2001, when the first plane hit. Because the show was called I Kinda Like It When a Lot of People Die. Who says there was nothing funny about 9/11? There were a couple dozen eggs on my face that day. Osama bin fucking Laden hadn't just blown up the World Trade Center, he'd blown up the best piece I'd written in 10 years. I'm a realist. We changed the name of the show to Complaints and Grievances. If there were such a thing as generic George Carlin, that title would be stenciled on the box. So let's talk about this special. Once again, live from Beacon Theatre, we start with another great opening line. You know what people don't talk about in public anymore? Pussy farts. And that line encapsulates this whole show for me in many ways. More jokey, more goofy, less preachy. Just plain good old fun. Of course, after some pussy and dick jokes, we had to address the events of 9/11, but even that is much more silly than his recent specials. We should send farters to the Middle East as a biological weapon. Don't get me wrong, it's funny stuff, but after his big ideas pieces, I expected something a little bit different. The stuff about traffic is just weaker, but in terms of delivery, George still got it. He may be a little hunched over, but man, silly faces, exaggerated intonation, whole passages of super fast talking, he's just entertaining to watch. Then some gross out humor about our bodies and whatnot, and I must say that there is something about watching an older gentleman talk about picking his ass that just melts my heart. There will even be repeated joke about fucking a 10 here. The list of people that ought to be killed is classic late Carlin. Quite clever, quite funny, not very punchliney, but not very preachy either. More for a smile and let's say a little bit of clapter than for big laughs. If anything, it's a little bit too long, or maybe not just a little bit. From proud parents and single name celebrities to guys that fly in balloons and guys named Todd. The whole range of different bits and pieces. With a special mention of gun enthusiasts and a guy named Wayne Lapierre, who sounds a little fruity to George. A little out of character joke for him, but whatever. We end with 10 Commandments bit, probably the most famous bit from this set, and it's good. It's more in vein of his last specials, mixing linguistic jokes with observational humor and a little bit of social commentary. Worthy, as per usual for George, but not overtly preachy as he can sometimes be. In conclusion, Complaints and Grievances is one of his weakest special from this era. You can see that it was supposed to be about something else, and Carlin had to come up with stuff to fill this hour quite quickly. There's a lack of purpose to those beats, a lack of structure. Some of them are way too long, others come and go too quickly, so the rhythm is off. And George knew it, even if in his opinion the root of a problem lay somewhere else. Hardcore fans were probably hoping I would do something about 9/11. I did mention it, the elephant in the living room no one was talking about, which got a kind of hopeful laugh. But I left it at that and keep the focus on strong observational stuff with the basic theme, assholes of our time. People who were visors, parents of honor students, guys named Todd, and 10 Commandments killed. But there was a hole in the show the size of Ground Zero. When I'm on the road doing promotional interviews for concerts, I love it when someone from Great Falls Gazette or the Pittsburgh Post and Nasal Drip says, "You must have a lot of stuff about Cheney and American Idol and Hillary's pantsuits," and I pull the rug right out from under them. I never talk about events or people in the news. I hate topical material because I hate to throw anything away. I don't want to develop a nice little thing about Bush or Scooter Libby and it kills, then I do it for a month or so and really tighten it, add 3 more jokes, get the whole fucking thing down cold, but it's not getting laughs anymore because it's old news. I'd have to abandon it. I fucking hate that. I like to polish, get it perfect, put it on tape and keep it forever. And he's probably right, because especially for me as a guy not from US, even the name Scooter Libby doesn't mean anything. It doesn't even sound like a real person, to be honest. We had to wait for another 4 years for Life is Worth Losing, which is probably George's darkest special, with cemetery stage design and all. And you remember when I said that you start to see years on him in those earlier specials? Oh man, is it accelerating. Getting older is a bitch. We start with one of those tour de force beats that he likes so much, almost a poem with language acrobatics, some very clever like alpha male on beta blockers. It's actually impressive. It's like George wants to send a message at the start of the show. I may be old, but I'm still here and I'm still capable. Even if the next joke is literally a repeat from the last special. Well, it's more like a follow-up. And then Dingleberry and Cornhole, a little gross out humor to put us in the mood. Mood for suicide. Yes, there will be a lot about that topic here. Even the joke that men are better at it, which you can see even today as a meme. Then we go to murder and assassinations. Like I've said, there's a lot of very dark, even bleak material here. And to be honest, it's interesting to watch, but not especially funny. Genocide, mass graves, even the audience seems to feel like it's a little much. Torture, human sacrifice, cannibalism, necrophilia. I don't know if anyone besides George could get away with it and even get some laughs. And then we switch to human stupidity and Americans. It's like late Carlin bingo at that point. Jerry Springer, shopping malls, consumerism, fat people. At least he's a little more lively in this part, but it's really preachy and ranty. Not much in terms of jokes, besides some gross out here. The bit about education is poignant, if a little bit tired at this point. The whole people that rule this country don't want you to be educated was covered by Hickses and even Eddie Griffins of this world decades earlier. And it's not like it's not true, but where's the funny? So many applause breaks, so few real laughs. But I have to give him that the "it's called the American Dream" line is killer. Another ranty chunk about the pyramid of the hopeless, and we finally get some more straight up humorous bit about autoerotic asphyxia. There will be even some real punchlines and big laughs from the audience. And the one about donating some particular female organs after death, at last, something written just for laughs and not with a big message behind and over it. Yeah, and we are at the hour point of the show and there's still a lot to cover. Why is it so freaking long? The hour was a sweet spot for George for decades. Now we're coming back to almost 75 minutes, like in the late 70s? And the last 10 minutes or so is one big bit that we heard about before. The fate of "I really like it when a lot of people die" is a reverse example of why I hate topical humor. A piece based on stuff we see on the news was killed by stuff we saw on the news. At least I didn't have to abandon it. It made into the next HBO show in 2005, Life is Worth Losing. That would be about 17 years after it had first come down the birth canal. But I wasn't taking any chances. I called it Coast to Coast Emergency. It was the finale and the best thing in the show. So now I have it. Polished, perfect, and put on tape. And I will keep it forever. Yeah, it may be the best part of the show, with some linguistic acrobatics once again, and even a little bit of stage production at the end, but it doesn't mean much when the rest is so at the best. I know that some folks love this special, but for me, it's just a mix of ranting on some dark subjects and gross out humor. It's not especially original, it's not especially funny. I think it's actually one of the George's worst. Bottom of the list for me. And we arrive at the last one. That's it. It's Bad For Ya from 2008. George is 70 at this point, and he really can do whatever he wants. So he starts by breaking one of his own rules and jumps into some topical stuff about Lance Armstrong and Tiger Woods. And then classic linguistic Carlin with a little bit of personal flavor about being an old fuck and what's good about being old. Really funny bit, especially about taking advantage of other people, stamping them and shitting pants. Mwah, chef kiss. And back to the language that surrounds dying and death. You can see that the audience at that point can kind of expect where the bit is gonna go, which normally would be a bad thing, but here it's kinda wholesome. It's all Georgie. We like him, we know how his mind works, and we enjoy each other's company. And then we go to hell. And you can see that he's gaining speed when there's time for one of his almost poetic, written out word for word bits. George will also come back to the idea that was present in his other specials, overpraising children. But now with more edge to it and with new bullshit that emerged. Playing dodgeball encourages aggression. Playing tag encourages victimization. Well, who would have thought that George would be so anti-woke in his old age? Maybe anyone who watched his fucking specials? Speaking of special things, not every child is special. Not everyone is a winner, it's bullshit and it's bad for ya. That's the credo and the chorus of this show. Great little joke with Adolf, and we go to stupid things that people say and that they cannot shut up and how to end those kind of conversations. George is in his complaining mode here, but it's much lighter than the last time. And the ratio of straight up rants to jokes is also much better. Back to children and parents with a little Bill Hicks-esque observations and jokes and how to handle people showing you their children photos. Then more social commentary about bullshit in America and the importance of asking questions, another excursion into preaching to the choir territory, a little more topical stuff about first ladies, and we go to patriotism and being proud of being American. This is very much in vein of Doug Stanhope. Quick stop at religion with fun observations about hats and swearing on the Bible or one's mother's grave. and we end on the climax. You don't have rights, they are not real. His last big idea bit. Clever, important, something to think about. The editor also thought that because we switched to different cuts through transparency as to highlight the importance of it all. His last bit on his last special. That was much better than the previous one, still ranty, but with more jokes and goofy thoughts. You can see that he still believes what he says and does it with conviction. The best from the late period Carlin, in my humble opinion. And that's it. If you are still here, first of all, thank you. And let's rank all Carlin's HBO specials just without 40 years of comedy. The last place, Carlin on Campus. Number 12, Life is Worth Losing. 11th spot for Carlin at Carnegie. Number 10 is Complaints and Grievances. Spot number 9 goes to George Carlin again. Number 8, It's Bad For Ya. Number 7, What Am I Doing in New Jersey? Followed by his debut special On Location, George Carlin at USC on 6th place. It's time for top 5 and we start with You Are All Diseased. Number 4 is Doing It Again. And top 3 looks something like that. 3rd place for Playin With Your Head. 2nd place goes to Jammin in New York. And number 1, my favorite George Carlin HBO special, is Back in Town. But to be honest, the exact order is not the most important thing here. He has some of the best stand-up specials in history in his catalogue, as well as some duds. That's to be expected for releases that came out in the span of 41 years. What can be said for sure is that he's one of the titans, absolute must-haves on any Mount Rushmore, and probably for some, they go. So I'm glad that we could celebrate his legacy today together. I've tried to find as many interviews and other sources of his own opinion on those specials as possible, but man, interviews before the internet and especially before podcasts sucked ass. Same questions and same answers ad nausea. Journalists were really fucking lazy back then, and they could get away with it. But the book, Last Words, was a great source of information and I can wholeheartedly recommend it to any Carlin's fan. Anyway, tell me without any hesitation what your list looks like in the comments. What's your favorite George Carlin special? Which one is the weakest? Do you still come back and watch some of them? And once again, thank you for your time. Take care, stay safe, stay sexy, go fuck yourself. My name is Krzysztof Sawczuk and this was Stand Up Teka.